Cam's going to give us another series of thoughts tonight. I'm going to guess that the title is Pattern from Above. So we'll turn our attention to him.
I'm still trying to figure out what the title is. How did you know to... Anyway, there it is. I'm going to start by reading Genesis 1. One of the things I love about Genesis 1 is that it's filled and it's rich with patterns. I like to share this exhort. It's one that I have worked on from time to time over the course of years, and it's like every time I chew on Genesis 1, I find more things. I'm probably not the only one who's read it more than a couple times, and yet there's still more. And I'll actually share a brief story. There was a gentleman that kind of acted like our parents when we were in South Africa. It was Barry Van Heerden and his wife, Wendith Van Heerden. And when we arrived there to do mission work, they kind of took us under their wings. And if you ask Barry what his favorite passage in the Bible, his first answer will be yes, because they're all his favorite passages in the Bible. But if you ask where he starts, it's always Genesis 1. And Genesis is a great place to start. And as I was studying this, this particular pattern, and he was like, well, share with me the things that you're seeing. And then he started sharing with me what he was seeing, and he was breaking down the letters of the Hebrew. So let me ask you a question. Does anybody know what the first Hebrew letter of the Bible is? No? It's interesting because God being the primary, right? You think that Aleph, as the first letter of the Bible, which is indicative of the first, might be the first letter, but you know that the letter that actually is the very first letter of the Hebrew Bible is Bet. It's the B. Does anybody know what the Bet is, what it represents? House. And the house is home, and the home is family. And the very first letter of the Hebrew Bible is the letter that represents family. And that would be his starting point in a conversation with you. And he's alive and well in South Africa, and if you wanted to look Barry Van Heerden up and say, so what do you think about Genesis? He'd likely have you at Bet pretty quick, because he's going to tell you that while God is primary, God's purpose and plan for the earth is about Bet. It's about house. It's about family. And that's not my exhort. So anyway, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void. Look for patterns. See if there's an obvious pattern that pops forward, because we're going to talk about it briefly. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said, let there be light. And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. Then God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below from the expanse which were the waters above. And it was so. God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day. Then God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and gathering of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth, bearing fruit after their kind, with seed in them. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a third day. Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. I don't know about you, I love astronomy. He made the sun, he made the earth, and he made the stars, all of them, all 7 of them. So God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, I'm not a flat earther, and I don't believe there are 7 stars. There's a lot more than that. I was just being facetious. And to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a 4th day. Then God said, let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth. In the open expanse of the heavens, God created the sea monsters. In the open expanse of the heavens, period. God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. There was evening and there was morning, the 5th day. Then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Then God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and everything that moves on the earth which has life. I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th. I have to use both hands. The 6th day. So what is one obvious pattern that we see in the proclamation of creation? And there are lots of things. I'm not looking for one answer. There's a lot of great answers. Who heard anything that was a pattern? Raise your hand. Yes, ma'am? Yes, ma'am.
Everything was good.
You have lots of goods, right? Did anybody count the number of goods? Okay, there's 6, right? And there's 6, and we're leading into the 7th day, right? When we talk about the creation, how many days in total are there in the creation? 6 days of active creation and 1 day of rest. So there's 7 days, 6 creating and 1 day resting. So yeah, depending upon how you interpret what I say, there's lots of great answers because I wasn't precise enough. So yes, so 6 days of creation, 7 days in the creation cycle, right? And that's one of the creative patterns is you have 7 days, and the 7th day is actually an interesting day. So I may not going to do that. The next 3 verses reference the 7th day. Now, what does the 6th day end in? What's one of the other patterns? We're going to talk about days. What's another pattern? And there's several. So it is good as one pattern. What else? Evening and morning, right? But if you've got a 7-day cycle that starts in darkness and ends in light, when does the 7th day start? It starts in light. This is what's really interesting, right? If you look at the cycle, every day starts in evening and ends in day. But if you look at the 7th day, there's no proclamation of of evening and morning the 7th day. There's no proclamation. You end from the 6th day, what ends in light, and you go into the 7th day, and he starts talking about the 7th day, and there's no bounding of the 7th day in darkness, right? And that's interesting. So when we start looking at this pattern from above, day 1, and there are other patterns which we'll likely bring, day 1, God created the heavens and the earth. I have to wait on this for a second. The earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. Right? And that's what you end up with. If you envision where we start in the 2nd verse, this is actually what you should see. The microphone. Sorry about this for those who are watching. And this is really, to me, is profound because the Hebrew language, they actually say in the first two verses that there's a pause. It's like a creative pause. It's giving birth. It's kind of like at this point where God created the heavens and the earth, and there was, the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And that was the starting point of creation. At this point, there was no day. There was only darkness. There was no revelation. There was only darkness. And that's how everything starts. And it's interesting because how it ends is there's no night. There's only light, right? And we can see that because if we look at the beginning of the scriptures in Genesis 1 and 2, we look at the end of the scriptures in Revelation 21 and 22, and it actually says there is no darkness anymore. There's only light. It starts in darkness, and then it ends in light. But it's like all the stuff in the middle isn't darkness or light. It's both, because day 2 begins again in darkness and then in light, right? The separation of the waters. Were there any other observations of patterns that were in Genesis while we're talking about it? Yes, ma'am? Separations, right? Absolutely. There was a separation. Every day has some kind of separation in it, every one of the 6 days, right? So it starts on the first day, the separation of darkness and light, right? Very good. Did you have something, Chris? I saw you raise your hand at the corner.
And it was so.
It was so. Oh, that was an interesting catch. So it was good goes 6 days, and then you have into the seventh day, which is obviously all about light and good. But it is so is also 6 times, but it doesn't proceed after that. So what I was finding when I was looking at patterns is that there are descriptions, and one of the descriptions, God has quantitative descriptions and he has qualitative descriptions. So it is so as a qualitative description. It is good as a qualitative description. Some of the things he creates and he says, that's how it was. And some of the things he creates and he says, and that was good. Now I want to call your mind to this question. Jesus is called good teacher and Jesus responds. Does anybody know how Jesus responds to the person that calls him good teacher? Now I keep seeing that Jesus calls back to Genesis on how he's going to preach, right? So when I hear Jesus say something, I wonder, is he starting in Genesis on this? And you see a lot of stuff that Jesus talks about that has its roots in Genesis, right? And so the question that I have is when he's responding to this guy that says, don't you know that only God is good? And then I go and I read Genesis 1 and I'm hearing that God is creating something and it is so. He's saying is basically this is the way it is. This is its way, right? It is common. This is the way it is. But then he says of other things, it is good. He says of the light, it is good. The light is good, right? But Jesus, when he says about good, he says, well, good is about God. Good is about God. So I wonder if the things in Genesis that talk about that which is good is God saying, and this is about me. The light is about me. I can see how that could be, right? I can see how some of his creation, when he says that's good, he's actually saying, this is going to give you some insight into me, right? Because it's not just common, it's good. So that separation is a great point. So we're going to look at a little bit of the separations as we go. Day 3, same type of thing, and I love this. And I'm going to backtrack just a tad bit, but because now we're going to get enough of the separation concepts visually to actually look at this. So the first day was darkness and light. So when we start with the conversation on Jesus, let's say John 1 is a great place to start with a discussion on Jesus. What is John 1 all about? It's about Jesus, right? But what does he come as? As the light of the world, right? And then we get to like John 3, and Jesus is having a conversation with Nicodemus, right? And if you go to John 3 and verse 19, 20, and 21, and he tells you the conclusion that I always like to read the conclusion before I then go and read the story. And he tells Nicodemus here, the problem is like this. Things that are done in the dark are done to be hidden because you don't want people to see, right? And that's not about God. He says things that come from the light, that's about God. When Jesus is talking about light and darkness, right? Or when John is talking about Jesus as the light of the world, these things all have their backdrop in Genesis 1 as the separation or the division between that which is hidden in the darkness and that which is revealed in the light. It's a separation that identifies that which is below And where does light come from? So everybody take a look at a light source. Right? Not everybody's looking. Where is a light source? Where is light? If you want to see the light, right? How many people are looking down at the light? Right? The light's not coming from down. It's coming from up. Right? And that's a first interesting lesson. Now the second day of division were the division of what? Waters. Some of the water was where? Below, and some was above. That's right. Now, interestingly enough, in the scriptures, you get a use of waters below and above. You have the idea of that which is common, and you have that idea of that which is holy. And we get quite a few of these. You get one that, therefore, since we have such a great cloud, what is that? That's a visual metaphor. We have such a great cloud of witnesses that Jesus is going to return to this earth, and he's going to come in the clouds, right? I don't think we're talking about water droplets, right? We're talking about believers. We're talking about those who've been elevated. We're not talking about people who are in heaven. We're talking about the dead first shall raise, and Jesus will come in the clouds, and the whole world will see him, and then those who are alive will be caught up together with them, right? And that's the beginning of the time of the judgment and the rule, right? So you get this idea of clouds that they're used metaphorically throughout the scriptures. It's that which is above because it's heavenly, right? Not location, but spiritual, versus that which is below. So the first day, the darkness is common, the light is holy. The second day, the waters below are common, the waters above are holy, right? And now you get to the third day, and I love what happens on the third day, because there's the third day story, there's a third day metaphor. What happens on the third day? If you're thinking about Jesus, God's creation, the plan of God for the earth, and Jesus, and something happens on the third day, what comes to your mind? Separated the water from the dry land, which is the creation. What else comes to your mind as a day 3 event that's materially significant in the scriptures? Resurrection, right? Death, burial, and resurrection. He was dead in the ground for 3 days, and then he's resurrected. You get that, right? That's an interesting type. The 3 shows up all over the scriptures, but it begins on the third day of creation, and it culminates in the resurrection with Jesus, right? It's a pretty interesting type. But I want to point you to 2 things that are said here. First, the dry land does get separated from the water, but it doesn't say that the dry land and the water separate. What it really is talking about, how does dry land and water separate? What has to happen to the land? Right? It has to come up, right? Because if the water's over here and the land's over here, I mean, it happened during the time of Pharaoh where the water stood up for a period of time, for a day. But if you're going to pull land, if you're going to make a landmass out of water, the land has to go up and the water has to go down. So when you think about the land, you're thinking about something that's elevated up out of the water. Now think about a spiritual metaphor, because Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection was represented by an act of baptism, right? And what is that? What are we made of, right? What is this? It's flesh. But the flesh is actually Adamah, and Adamah in the gospel in Genesis 1 is actually clay, right? It's dirt. So what we're being told is that we're actually like the land, but before the land could be raised up out of the water, it was first under the water on day 3. So here's the interesting thing, is Jesus, right, before or as he is introduced into his ministry, John baptizes him. He takes this being that's made of clay, dirt, puts him under the water, and then raises him up out of the water, right? And I'm about to say something in a second that might connect to this picture right here. He raises him up out of the water. He begins his ministry, and his ministry begins to bear fruit on the third day. And that event represents the 3 days of death, burial, and resurrection, right, that ends in life. And here we have the land drawn up out of the water, and then as the land is drawn up out of the water, plants come to life that bear seed after their own kind. And particularly, I put two particular kinds of plants because there are two particular kinds of plant states, if you will. I don't know a better word for that. One of the plant types has seed on the outside, which is seed that reproduces the same plant. And the other kind of plant is the plant that has seed on the inside. And I think this is the first kind of nudge, know what I mean? Know what I mean? It's got one kind of plant that's going to be like wheats and grains and that type of thing. And the other kind of plant is going to be things like fruits and grapes and this type of thing. And it's funny that our memorials, seeing as we're keeping with the day 3 principle, that our memorials are bread and wine. Bread is made from seed-bearing plants where the seed's on the outside, and wine is seed-bearing plants where the seed is on the inside, because grapes have seed on the inside and wheat is seed on the outside. Right? The two pieces of our memorials that memorialize his death, burial, and resurrection are the two kinds of seeds, which, it's just interesting. It doesn't, nowhere writes it out and says that's what that means, but I'm just like, it actually outlines that those are two kinds of seeds, and it represents the baptism. It represents redemption and life. So day 4, right, we have a second separation, but the second separation is a separation we've already had before. What kind of separation is this? What is being separated on day 4? Light and darkness, right? And we have two kinds of bodies that do this. We have the body of the day, and the body of the night. Now, sun, moon, and stars comes up in lots of different metaphors in the scriptures. But what's interesting to me is that before the resurrection, the sun is represented usually of the power and authority of God. And then after the resurrection, the sun can be the power and authority of Jesus. But there's a good reason for that. But the other thing is the moon. What is the moon? What from a light perspective, what light do we see from the moon? Reflected light. Okay. So somebody in the back, throw out, what's the color of the light of the sun? Yellow. All right, very good. So somebody closer to the front, what's the light of the color of the moon? White, right? Classically. I mean, it could be a little gray, there's a little dark circles there, but this is the light reflected from the sun off of the moon. The sun is yellow, gold, right? The moon is white or silver. Isn't that interesting? Because gold is used in the scriptures as well. When gold is used, what might it be representative of? There's 2 or 3 different things. All of them are connected. Not just faith. What kind of faith? Pure faith, right? Faith that's been tried and purified and cleansed. It is without any impurities. What else might be gold be representative of? Pardon? Holiness, absolutely. It's representative of holiness. And more than that, it's representative of the one who is holy, right? God, right? So gold is representative of that which does not corrupt. In the end, it represents that which does not corrupt. Now, silver, on the other hand, is a metal that's metaphorically used for humans and human flesh. Because what happens if you don't keep silver clean? What's it do? What color does it turn? It tarnishes, and it'll ultimately go through a phase of colors, but end in black. It'll end in black, right? And if you rub it really good, it becomes almost like a mirror. Matter of fact, you can use silver as a backing on glass for mirrors. So if you don't clean it, it goes black. If you do clean it, it becomes pure and clear, right? And beautiful. But the thing is, it becomes something that's able to give a pure reflection. And these colors are cast even in the sun and the moon. And then the stars represent something different. But day 4 is the separation of dark and light. But God is saying that even in the darkness, while dark and light are separated, you can still see, right? Because if you've ever walked outside at night with a full moon, has anybody walked outside with a full moon? Can you see the ground? Absolutely, right? So God is providing light even in the darkness so that we may walk. And that's interesting, at least to me, about, part of what we're getting in day 4 is the gift of God, the separation of light and darkness, and the ability to see even when things are darkest. So day 5 is interesting. Day 5. starting in darkness. Now we have something new. We didn't have this on day, at the beginning of day 4. We didn't have it in day 3, day 2, or day 1, right? The stars. And he created the stars. Like I say, I like astronomy. I didn't say pastrami, right? I said astronomy. Okay, good. I like astronomy, and I used to do some stargazing. And you can see things. It'd be like the night's black. You don't see anything there. You point your scope up, and there's 10,000 stars in one spot. You can't even see. There's so many of them in one spot. And you step back, and you're like, I can't see it. And you look, it's like, where'd all those stars come from? The skies are full of stars. And they're absolutely glorious. And God and he made the stars too. It's like the greatest part of the creation as a stated afterthought. So it's absolutely beautiful. But here's what happens on the 5th day. Now, I think this is really interesting because there's 2 things that are shown here. Now, each one of the pieces of the scripture refer to us to the creation of that day by that which is common and that which is holy. So he mentions the dark first, the light second. He mentions the waters below first, the waters above second, right? The 3rd day, he mentions, 3rd day. 2nd day is waters, right? 4th day is light. 3rd day is land. Thank you very much. He mentions the water. That is right. He mentions the waters. You said that right. He mentions the waters, and then he mentions the land, right? You see the pattern. He's saying this is what's common and this is what's holy. This is what's below and this is what's elevated, right? And the 4th day, he's got the darkness again, but then he's made the lights. So the lights in the night sky are holy. And what I find is interesting is the sun, we said, can represent God, holiness, tried faith, because all those things connect back to God in his perfection. But the moon has its phases, doesn't it? The moon at full phase is a full reflection. What's the moon at new phase? It's like almost no reflection. And I think what we see in the moon is the metaphor of believers, right? Sometimes we don't reflect a whole lot. Sometimes God is working with us and we're reflecting more. And the full moon is like, I really think the full moon is a metaphor of where Jesus was, in his life, a full and complete reflection of the glory of God in the body of a man. The full moon, a full reflection. And that's what, we're being invited, as it were, in Genesis to keep our eyes on this. That's the goal, is the full reflection, as best as mortal flesh can. But here's day 5, and I find day 5 is quite interesting. So let's talk about the fish first. Where do we see fish used and leveraged in the scriptures? Where are some places we might see it? When he selected his disciples? Like the Peter conversation of, I'm going to make you fishers of men? That's interesting. Anything else? Okay, I can't hear you, but say it again.
I said Jonah got a little bit involved.
Yeah, Jonah wasn't. Jonah was involved in the fish. Absolutely. And it's interesting that the fish became a mechanism for delivering Jonah, right, to life. But what did the fish have to do to deliver Jonah to life? He came out of the waters, right? He came out of the waters and spit Jonah up on the shore, right? When Jesus was with the apostles and he was telling them, that I'm going to make you fishers of men, they had just caught this load of fish, and what did they do with the fish? Did they give the fish life? No, they made the fish dinner, right? They brought the fish in the nets, and they brought them up onto the land, and the fish died, right? But it's interesting because when you talk about death and resurrection, when you talk about the type of death and new life, what is that for men? We talked about it a minute ago, right? How do we die and come to life again? And still baptism, right? The baptism represents death, burial, and resurrection. So it's like the fish have to come out of the water. If we are the metaphor of fish, if we're the fish, we have to come out of the water. But the only way that works is if we die to being fish and come alive to being something else and carry a new life in us, right? Because fish can't live out of water. And there are some other interesting metaphors. The waters are used in different places, like the waters are used in Revelation. I believe it's either chapter 17 or 18, and it talks about the woman who's got her feet on the land and feet on the waters. It says, you got to understand the feet on the waters are the people of the world, right? So this idea, they're not believers, it's people in the world. The waters represent, the people in the world, and the fish, therefore, are the people. And that's the metaphor Jesus is thinking of. And when Jesus is talking to Peter and talking to the others about, I will make you fishers of men, I think this is where he's going. Because fish are common, but the believers are not. They're holy. They're the clouds. They're the light from above, right? But where do we see the doves? Where do we see doves in the scriptures? Noah's Ark. Absolutely. Definite reference to the dove. What else? Jonah, Jesus, right? At the baptism, John is told the one whom I have seen the Spirit descend upon and it stays. That's the one, right? And it says the Spirit of God descended upon Jesus like a dove. So the dove is definitely an above thing. Keeps the pattern of Genesis alive, right? He talks about the fishes, and then he talks about the doves. And all these patterns connect back to the plan of God. Now, day 6. Day 6. We know what's in day 6. We know what's created on day 6, right? So what's the first thing that comes to your mind on day 6? Man. What's the other thing that's created on day 6? Beasts. Very good. So we got man and animals. Now, which one is mentioned first, man or animal? If I hear manimal, I'm going to be like, that's not fair. Okay. Yeah, it's right. It's animals, right? The pattern that we're seeing up to this point is the common is mentioned first and the holy is mentioned second, except day 6, that's not really true. Day 6 isn't really true. Day 6 is something different. And here's what I'm going to postulate that for. Because we know in the scriptures that we're told that the animals are created out of the dirt and that the breath of God gives them life. But man is created completely different. What is he created out of? The dirt. Okay, so what's different? So God gives man life by giving him his breath. Well, wait a minute. The animals are created from the dirt and given the breath, and man is created from the dirt and given breath. So what's different about man? And there's something that's really obvious. What's the first thing that's really obvious that's different about man that animals don't share? That's right. You want to say that in the back? I want to hear you. The shape. Yeah, his form. Right? Absolutely. So we know in the scriptures that God says that he formed Adam. Right? And I've got a picture here that is an imagining of God actually with his hands forming Adam. I don't know how God did it, whether he just thought it made it happen or whether he used his hands and turned clay into man. And I don't think it matters one way or the other, but the point that it makes is that he formed man specifically to be an expression of him by appearance. But in Genesis 1:26 and 1:27, I think is something that's a little different and something that we read all the time, but we don't necessarily recognize that one of the things that every one of these days of creation has in it is an introduction to what's going to happen and then the explanation or the qualification of the outcome. I'm going to create the light, and then he created the light. I'm going to separate, and then he separates, right? Every day has a proclamation, a statement of intent, and then the fulfillment of the intent. And so day 6 is no different, because we don't start with Genesis 1:27, which says, and then God made Adam in his image. In his image he created them, male and female, they were created. He doesn't start with 1:27, he starts with 1:26, right? And 1:26 says, and they created, okay, now I have to look it up because then I tried to quote it and then it broke. My brain, that is. Okay, here it is, 1:26 without the broken brain. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, right? And let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and over all the earth and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. The point I want to bring to you is listen to the way it says it. It doesn't say, and then God did this, and it says, and then God said, let us do this. It's a statement of intent. The statement of intent for mankind is that he be created in God's image and that he be transformed into God's likeness. Now, when you understand the statement of intent and you understand the statement or the proclamation of event, Genesis 1:27 is the assertion of the event that happened. So I want you to hold on to these two things. God said, let us create man in our image to be like us. Right? Hold on to those two things. Now I'm going to slowly read Genesis 1:27. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, they were created. What am I missing? Well, you're missing the part about likeness. Right? Did anybody hear God creating man in his likeness? Or did God only create man in his image? Right? It's only image. Let us, he says, let us create man in our image after our likeness. But then in 27, God created him in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, they were created. No likeness. You see, image is appearance. Right? You can look like God, but being like God is a whole other conversation. It's a whole other discussion. And so what we have here is God creating something common and then creating something else to be holy. Not creating something else that is holy, creating something else to be holy. We were created, right? We were created to be holy, but we weren't created holy, because holy is something different. This is something that I find in Genesis 1 that I think is fantastic, and that's that God makes this pattern so that he sees the intent of so that he delivers to us the intent of our creation, that we might discover something and might respond. Because what God is saying is, I've created the holy, but I've created the common, but I've created the holy to come out of that. I've created the common, but I've created the holy to come out of that. And over again, God is showing us how that holy is relating back either to him and his character or to us in him every time. I'm going to contrast this real quick with a verse you probably know, that man without, tonight's my night, that man without, I keep wanting to say man without, that's what I keep trying to say, and that's the wrong verse, is like the animals that perish. It isn't man without honor is like the animals that perish. Yeah, I know, that's what I'm doing. So basically, tonight's going to be the night I drop verses. But anyway, that it's basically saying that man, if man without God, right? If you don't have God, then you're like an animal that perishes, right? If you don't have faith. I know it's a Psalms. Man without understanding. Thank you very much. So man without understanding is like the animals that perish. Man without understanding is like the animals that perish. The understanding of what? Right? The understanding of God, the understanding of our call, the understanding of our purpose for living. If you don't have the understanding of God's call to be a son or a daughter, and you aren't ascribing to that, then he says you're like an animal. As a matter of fact, it's not so much the metaphor of being like an animal. It's not a simile of being like an animal. What he's actually saying is the animals and man are created the same. If you have no understanding, you're an animal. What differentiates you from a cat or a dog or a horse or any other variety of animals on the earth is that you understand what God is creating you for and you say yes. That's what Genesis 1 is really getting us to, I think. And more than that, but that is one of the main themes that's in Genesis 1 is, look, I'm showing you this pattern. I'm showing you that you can live in the dark or you can come to the light. I'm showing you that coming to the light is not an event, it's a process. It happens over 6 days. Man's created on the 6th day, so I think it's a message to us. He's saying it takes time. Eventually, there will only be light on the earth. Originally, there was only darkness on the earth. And what I'm doing is I'm transforming from dark to light, and I'm inviting you to be part of that transformation, right? But I've created you not to be common. I've created you to be holy. But if you don't have understanding, you're still with the animals. If you do have understanding, then I'm inviting you on my journey to holiness. I'm inviting you on my journey to the light. And I find that is a beautiful conversation that's happening right there in Genesis 1. And that whole passage in the Genesis 1:26 and 1:27 for me is really forming a foundation point of God's master plan for us in this earth, as he's telling us right there, there's a way that I've created you to be. I've created you to not only to look like me, but to become like me in character, right? And we probably know the Exodus chapter 34 verse where God expounds on his character, that he's compassionate and he's gracious and he's slow to anger and he's abounding in love, that he abounds in forgiveness, right? And he forgives wickedness, rebellion, and sin. To those who love him and turn to him, he has told us who he is and how he is. And he's inviting us to follow that example, to be manifestations of that same character, so that each one of us will take upon that same character, that will seek to be compassionate with each other, gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in love, embracing and encouraging and supporting one another in all that we say and do. And that's the message I wanted to bring to you today in Genesis 1. And I hope you find that useful. But I think it's beautiful that from the very beginning, the first Hebrew letter of the Scriptures, God used bet, because it's about family, it's about you, and it's about me. And from every letter after that, he keeps trying to share with us a word of encouragement that he has developed us for the purpose of being elevated to be holy. That's his plan for us, and he has the power to make it so if we say yes and walk with him.